Hey, Stephen Kent Mirassou here of Wine Saves Lives and the Stephen Kent Winery, coming to you from my patio here in the beautiful downtown Livermore Valley. Touch chilly, but otherwise perfect. We have a new release for our club members coming out in a couple of days, in fact. That is a Cabernet Sauvignon from two of our favorite sites in Livermore, Gilmedi and Lencioni Vineyards in Livermore. So touch of the blend that comes from George's 3 Vineyard in Napa and from Bates Ranch in the Santa Cruz Mountains. What's different about this wine than would be typical for us, although not particularly unusual, is it has no vintage date. It's a blend of Cabernet from a couple of different years. In California, vintage denotes when the fruit was harvested. Winemaking generally takes longer than a few months, so we get into the following year to get winemaking completely done, and obviously with aging, the wines are in the barrel for a couple of years. In California, up until relatively recently, vintage was basically important only as the denotation of harvest time. There was so little variation from one year to the other, generally speaking, that it didn't tell a real story to consumers about how good the wine might be. That's changing a bit now as we get much more variability in weather in California, at least in the Livermore Valley, than we've gotten the previous 100 years or so. Vintage, conversely, in Europe, in Bordeaux, for instance, has been extremely important in telling the story about relative quality from one year compared to the next. Colder years generally produced fruit that wasn't as good, for instance, wasn't as rich, wasn't as ripe, didn't make wines that were as big as those sunnier, warmer years. And vintage dating really was able to tell a shorthand story about overall quality. As it gets warmer in Europe, as it gets warmer in Bordeaux, there's a little bit less variation from vintage to vintage, although rain and various other things that tend to hit during harvest time in Bordeaux and doesn't generally happen in California can still make for a wide swing in terms of overall quality. We looked at this particular wine as a wine that was going to be about a house style. For our wines, for me as the winemaker, it's always been important to create a wine, to make a wine that was beautiful, a wine that was balanced. And the wine was beautiful because it was balanced. It showed the proper relationship and proportion of fruit and wood and tannin and acid that it needed in order to tell a complete story to the wine drinker. You wanted something that would have a lot of fruit on entry, that would give you fresh blasts of dark berried fruit for Cabernet, that would showcase some of the herbal quality that Cabernet from 20 years ago used to have, but that would then showcase the site. If there was a little eucalyptus on a vineyard and the wine showed, that was a perfectly appropriate signature for the wine because that's an environmental, terroir-driven aspect of that particular site. It was the right thing to do to include that aspect in the wines. It still is. We don't want to make wines that are overly extracted or big just for the purpose of being big. That's a characteristic that certainly was prized in California wine, especially Cabernet from Napa Valley. You wanted to have wine that had at least 100%, if not 200% new oak, and you wanted to have wines that had a great deal of tannin to them, or that had a sense of bigness in the mouth at least, that would say this is Napa Cab. And those characteristics to me are boring, uninteresting. They tell a mundane and repetitive story that is of zero interest to me. And because we are a very small winery, and because everything goes through my palate at one point or another, can choose to showcase certain aspects of the wine that I like. And hopefully we'll find the audience and continue to find the audience that appreciates those same qualities. And that's where we are with this wine. It's 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, 86% of which, is Livermore Valley, is Lencioni and Gilmedi Vineyards. There's a little bit of George's 3 Cab from Napa and a little bit of Bates Ranch Cab from the Santa Cruz Mountains to fill out that blend. I think this wine's gorgeous. I think this wine ready to drink now and will be a beautiful food compatibility wine, a wine that will go wonderfully with pork dishes and lamb dishes and beef dishes, as well as bigger fishes. A wine that will age in the midterm, 5 to 10 years, but a wine really that should be drunk in the next several years, I think, to showcase and to be able to capture those elements of the wine that are more fruit dominant than they are structural. This is a wine that I think will appeal to those who are looking for balance and who are looking for beauty and aren't necessarily looking to get socked in the jaw by the fist that is tannin and over oakedness. Hope you enjoy this wine. Hope you get a chance to come to by the winery here in Livermore and see us and let us pour you some Cab and let us pour you a bunch of Cab Franc. And we hope that you have a great rest of the afternoon. Drink something delicious.